The rain fell steadily on the city streets, creating rivers along the sidewalks and pooling in the worn corners of the alleyway. The evening sky had turned a deep gray, and the streetlights cast long, shimmering reflections on the wet pavement. Marcus Bennett walked quickly through the downtown district, his hand firmly holding his daughter's smaller one. At 5 years old, Emma was usually full of energy and questions, but tonight she seemed quieter than usual. Her pink raincoat was buttoned all the way up, and she clutched her small teddy bear against her chest with her free hand. Marcus was tired. As the CEO of Bennett Technologies, his days were filled with meetings, decisions, and endless responsibilities. But none of that mattered as much as the little girl walking beside him. Since her mother had left 3 years ago, it had been just the two of them. He had learned to braid her hair, pack her lunches, and read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. They were taking a shortcut through the older part of the city, heading toward the parking garage where Marcus had left his car that morning. The buildings here were made of weathered brick, and the narrow streets held memories of a different time. Emma suddenly stopped walking. "Daddy, wait," she said softly, tugging on his hand. Marcus paused and looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were wide and focused on something ahead of them, down a small alley that branched off from the main street. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, following her gaze. "There's a lady over there," Emma whispered. "She's sitting on the ground." Marcus squinted through the rain. Sure enough, in the dim light of the alley, he could make out 2 figures huddled against the brick wall. A woman sat on the wet ground, and a small child stood close beside her. His first instinct was to keep walking. The city was full of people in difficult situations, and he had learned long ago that you couldn't help everyone. He had a daughter to protect, a company to run, and a life that was already complicated enough. But Emma was already moving toward the alley, her small feet splashing through puddles. "Emma, wait," Marcus called out, but she was already several steps ahead of him. He hurried to catch up, his polished shoes getting soaked as he followed her into the narrow space between the buildings. The alley smelled of rain and old brick, and the sounds of the city seemed suddenly distant. As they approached, Marcus could see the scene more clearly. A young woman sat with her back against the wall, her clothes damp from the rain. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with long blonde hair that hung in wet strands around her face. Her eyes were closed, and her expression showed both exhaustion and pain. Standing protectively beside her was a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with the same blonde hair as her mother. The child wore a thin dress that was completely soaked through, and she held a worn teddy bear that looked remarkably similar to Emma's. Emma walked straight up to them, her small face serious and concerned. "Hello," she said gently. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked at Emma with wary eyes but didn't respond. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and she tried to sit up straighter, wincing as she moved. Marcus stepped closer, kneeling down carefully to put himself at eye level with the woman and children. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm and professional despite the unusual situation. The woman looked at him, and for a moment, Marcus saw something in her eyes, pride fighting against desperation, strength battling with vulnerability. I'm fine," she said, but her voice was weak. "We just need a minute to rest." The little girl beside her spoke up suddenly, her voice trembling. "Mommy can't walk. Her ankle. She twisted it, and we've been trying to get home, but she can't stand up anymore." Emma immediately turned to her father, her small hand reaching for his sleeve. "Daddy, we have to help them," she said with absolute certainty. Marcus studied the situation carefully. The woman's right ankle was clearly swollen, even visible beneath her damp pants. She had probably been trying to push through the pain, to get herself and her daughter home, until she simply couldn't go any further. "How long have you been sitting here?" Marcus asked. The woman hesitated. "Maybe an hour. I've been trying to call for help, but my phone died, and everyone who walks by." She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. Everyone who walked by had kept walking, just like Marcus had planned to do. He looked at his daughter, who was now standing beside the other little girl, showing her the teddy bear she carried. The 2 children were nearly the same size, their faces both innocent and trusting in a way that made his chest tighten. Marcus made his decision. "I'm going to help you," he said firmly. "My car is just a few blocks away. I can carry you there, and we'll get you to a hospital." The woman shook her head quickly. "No, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Marcus said gently. "My daughter is asking, and I don't say no to her very often." Emma nodded seriously, as if this was an established fact. Marcus stood up and carefully positioned himself beside the woman. "This might be uncomfortable, but it's the fastest way. Is that okay?" The woman looked at her daughter, then at Emma, and finally at Marcus. Slowly, she nodded. With practiced strength, Marcus slipped one arm behind her shoulders and another beneath her knees, lifting her carefully from the wet ground. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel her trembling slightly, whether from cold, pain, or simply the vulnerability of the moment, he wasn't sure. "Girls, stay close," he said, and both children immediately moved to flank him, Emma on one side and the other little girl on the other. They made their way out of the alley and back onto the main street. Marcus walked steadily, his daughter's hand in his pocket where she had tucked it, and the other little girl walking just beside them, keeping a protective eye on her mother. The woman spoke quietly, her voice near his ear. "My name is Sarah. This is my daughter, Lily." "Marcus," he replied, "and you've already met Emma." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "I didn't know what we were going to do." Marcus thought about all the times in his life when he had needed help and someone had been there. He thought about the night Emma was born and he had held her for the first time, knowing that his entire life had just changed. He thought about every decision he had made since then, trying to be the kind of father she deserved. "Sometimes we all need someone to carry us through the hard parts," he said simply. By the time they reached the parking garage, both little girls were chattering together like old friends, their teddy bears having apparently introduced themselves as well. Marcus carefully settled Sarah into the back seat of his car, and the girls climbed in beside her. As he drove toward the hospital, Emma asked questions about Lily's teddy bear, and Sarah gave him quiet directions to where they lived. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the car, there was warmth. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the most important thing you can do is simply stop walking and pay attention. Sometimes the best decisions aren't made in boardrooms or through careful analysis. Sometimes they're made in a rainy alley, by a 5-year-old girl with a kind heart, who reminds you of what truly matters.